Let's head around the Inside Politics table, ask our great reporters to get you out ahead of the big political news just around the corner. Julie Pace.
I spent most of last week in New Hampshire talking to folks in the Republican establishment, and there's a lot of concern among these folks that voters in New Hampshire are not going to coalesce around one of the candidates in that wing of the party in time for the primary, essentially leaving Trump the opportunity to take a plurality of the vote. You've got Chris Christie building a lot of momentum, but he's competing with 3 or 4 candidates for those votes. And right now, there's no organized effort underway to try to push a John Kasich or a Jeb Bush out of the race before the primary. But there are some preliminary discussions happening about what that wing of the party will do if all of those candidates want to come out of New Hampshire and continue on. And 2 of the names that I heard a lot about were Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney, not to run, but to essentially have a come to Jesus conversation with these candidates and come up with a process for winnowing down that part of the field.
Yeah, okay, that would be fun. That would be fun. Great, good luck with that, Ed.
So, John, debates are always a good time for members of the party to get together and talk about other things before the big show. On Monday in Las Vegas, a bunch of Hispanic conservative activists are going to be holding meetings with some of the presidential campaigns to go over their immigration policy and talk about other issues. Representatives of the Bush, the Rubio, the Cruz, and the Paul campaigns, the Carson campaign, will be meeting with this group. This is the same group of Hispanic conservatives that showed up at the last debate and denounced Donald Trump and said that this has got to stop. They're looking to learn more from the other candidates. Maybe at some point they make an endorsement. Might not carry a lot of water, but it would definitely allow the person that gets that endorsement to make a general election argument that, you know, if I'm able to draw Hispanic support, perhaps I'm the one we should be nominating.
It would be an important signal there. Jeff?
Well, it's too early to talk about an exit strategy, or is it, for some of these people? More and more we are hearing from top donors and supporters of some of these presidential candidates that you were talking about, Julie, that how long are they going to go here? They're, made it to the end of the year, and is it time to save face? There's still time to get out of this process before the voting begins. And one person you hear over and over is Jeb Bush. His campaign will say, no, not at all, no chance. We will stay in through Iowa, New Hampshire, and beyond. We have a path. Increasingly, a lot of his donors do not believe that that is true. So this is the most critical week of this campaign, I believe, for Jeb Bush. The rise of Ted Cruz only intensifies this conversation among party leaders, because for all that worry about Donald Trump, there's equal worry about Ted Cruz being the party's nominee. So watch stage right to see if anyone is on the verge of leaving.
Been a terrible year for Jeb. He needs to end it on a better note, Abby.
Well, I just got back from spending a week and a half in San Bernardino, and that investigation continues to expand in ways that I think are pretty surprising. A lot of it's pointing to perhaps an intelligence failure, which puts Ted Cruz in a really tough spot. He supported the National Security Agency's intelligence or program that would roll back some of their intelligence gathering efforts. And it's not just Rubio that's going to be hammering him on that. We'll see Chris Christie coming out of the woodworks. He's rising in New Hampshire. And this is, I think, he thinks, his central issue. So we'll see who else can maneuver on that issue. And who knows, maybe Donald Trump will jump into the fray as well.
Yet another test of how Cruz can take a punch now that he's heading up. I'll close with a bit more on the Cruz momentum and its impact, as Jeff just talked about, in the Republican Party's 2016 thinking. Most top party strategists now view a Cruz Iowa win as a near lock, and no one thinks of him as a one-state wonder because of his fundraising success and the combination of Tea Party and evangelical appeal. And so as a Cruz path to the nomination is debated, many of those strategists, just as they do about Donald Trump, think a Cruz at the top of the ticket would be a disaster for GOP Senate candidates in blue and purple states like New Hampshire, Wisconsin, and Ohio next year. Now, the Cruz camp calls this typical misguided establishment hand-wringing. But the worries that either Trump or Cruz will top the ticket are real enough that they play into what Jeff and Julie were talking about just a moment ago. Conversations nationally and in New Hampshire about whether there's any way to squeeze out a couple of the center-right candidates ASAP. But given the egos involved, and the unpredictability of the past year, most establishment strategists now assume that moment of truth does not come until right after New Hampshire.